All right, we'll kind of come back to this question a little bit later. Next, we have different types of sources for college papers. That's the next page in your handout. Can you use Wikipedia, for example, in college papers? Can you cite that? No, but why? Why do they say, oh, you can't cite Wikipedia, you can't cite encyclopedias? Which of these are valid? Which of these are good? And why? So these kind of range from popular sources to more academic sources, but where do you draw the line? Where do you kind of divide them? What's an academic source? What's a non-academic source? And how do you tell? So there are a number of different types of sources here. I want you to discuss these, and again in terms of style, tone, type of information and ideas, how sources are used and types of sources used, the writer's expertise, and the intended audience. How are these different? And based on this criteria, which of these are probably good for college papers and which ones are not so good for college papers or should not be used for college papers, and why? So I want you to discuss these for a while. So pause the video and talk. Okay, so you might see how some of these sources are obviously not of good quality for college papers. Some are, and some are kind of in a gray area. It will depend. There are certain kinds of sources that are maybe okay for a freshman, for writing a paper in a freshman or second year class, first or second year college class, an introductory class, but you probably wouldn't use it for a paper in your more advanced third or fourth year college class. And the kind of stuff you deal with in your third or fourth year college class and the kinds of sources you would read and cite in papers, you're not ready for that yet in your first or second year of college. So that's why I think the traditional distinction between academic sources versus non-academic, general, popular sources is not really helpful or useful. Because one, I think it's more of a continuum, and there's more, it's more complex. I make a three-way distinction in sources. I make a three-way distinction. I say there are general or popular sources that you generally don't use for college papers. There's a good reason why common sources like Wikipedia, encyclopedias, common reference works, popular books, popular magazines are not generally cited or used for college papers. There are a few exceptions which we will talk about in a later video, but pretty much at least 1 through 11, certainly not, also 12. Most college textbooks, especially in regular college courses, they're written as college textbooks, and they actually represent what is relatively general or common information in the field. It may be new to you, but it's not new in the field. It's not really that informative, and it's not original or first-hand. It's second-hand. It's a summary of what is commonly known in the field. 13 newspapers like these. I'm not sure about. Some of these are kind of a gray area. They're a bit better than 1 through 12, so it's kind of a gray area, these are sort of popular sources, but they're maybe a bit better than the others. It's kind of a gray area. They may or may not be usable depending, but I would kind of call them popular or general sources. So with possible exceptions of some of these in 13, 1 through 12, 1 through 13, these are popular or general sources. And the style is very informal, colloquial, conversational. The quality of the information and ideas is not really deep. It is generally common knowledge, general knowledge, even general knowledge in a college field, as well as fiction. Some of the items in number 9, though, some of these, if it's written by an expert, though, that actually might count as a more professional source. So actually, some of the books in number 9 might be okay for college papers, at least a freshman paper, because they are a bit more professional quality. But for most of these, except for maybe 9 and 12 and 13, for many of these categories, these popular sources, the writers may not be experts. They may not be trained academic or professional experts. They may not even know what they're talking about. The audience is a very general audience. Many of these don't cite sources, or if they do, they may not be very good sources. The audience is very general. We get into kind of better quality materials with some of these better periodicals, maybe to some degree 13, but especially 14 and 15. So periodical is something that's published periodically, newspapers and magazines, in other words. These are generally written by experts, at least professional experts. So the science magazines are written by science journalists. They have at least a master's degree in a science field. They can understand the science research and they can explain it to you. People who write for The Economist, they have some academic and or professional expertise and background in economics and business and finance. These news sources here in 14 professional journalists and editors and analysts. 15 professional trade journals, as I mentioned, written by experts for maybe non-experts, but educated people, professional. So 14 and 15 are what I call professional sources. So the traditional two-way distinction between academic and non-academic popular journal sources, you may have been taught that in a writing class before. I find that too simple, too simplistic. It doesn't really work because obviously many of the sources, like 1 through 13, you may not cite in a college paper, but 14 and 15 you probably would cite in a college paper, these professional sources. Your first or second year of college, you're not ready to handle real academic sources. So you'll probably be using professional sources like these in 14 or 15. Or even in some practical fields like business fields, social work, for example, you might use these kinds of sources even in your third and fourth year of college, especially a lot. In your third or fourth year of college, you will also start to deal with more academic sources, which we'll get to next. But with the professional sources, the writers are experts of some kind, either academic experts or professional experts. They have professional expertise from working in a particular profession for a long time, and reputation and credibility and a lot of knowledge and understanding, or they are academic experts writing for a non-expert audience. Now from 16 on, we get into academic sources. So these are sources by experts for experts. Now 16, a master's thesis, is kind of a gray area because this is somebody's first attempt at serious research, but the quality of master's theses, it really varies, and it may not be good quality because it's somebody's first attempt at doing this. PhD doctoral thesis, Paksa Nunmun, that's an academic source, but I wouldn't advise you to use it because I don't think you would be able to read a 200-page research document and understand it and use it intelligently. They're long and they're big. Some of the others, like conference presentations, unpublished articles, they may be somebody's preliminary research and it hasn't really gone through much checking or anything yet. So the most common academic sources are things like academic books, monographs, academic research books, articles from academic research journals like these, and other kinds of research papers. Those are real academic sources. And again, don't try these unless you can actually understand them. Your third or fourth year of college, you'll start to read some of these in your linguistics classes or literature classes and such. And you go to graduate school for a master's or PhD, you will read these all the time until you're sick of them. These are the heavy academic sources. So the style and tone are very academic and technical, and may be too much for you. The information is original research. These consist of original research. The other sources, the general and professional sources, are not usually original research. This is original research. The writers are experts. They are professors, they are PhD students or full-time researchers. They are experts writing for other experts. The audience consists of other academic experts. And that's why these may be too much for you. Sources are used, a lot of sources are used, academic and technical sources, and they are cited in a very formal citation style, which we will learn about later. So these criteria help us distinguish general sources from professional sources from academic sources. And there's it's kind of a continuum. Sometimes there are gray areas in between. If you think about these general criteria, the style and tone, the type of information and ideas that are presented, and how informative they are, how deep the information and ideas are, the sources used, the kinds of sources used and how they're used, the kind of information which is primary research information for academic research articles, and usually not primary original and not necessarily primary research information in the other types of sources, as well as the intended audience. These criteria distinguish these kinds of sources. Popular sources that you generally don't use for college papers, professional sources which you will use in college papers a lot, and academic sources which you might start to use in advanced college courses. I will have more to say about these later, some more detailed explanations and examples in the next videos. As writers, it's helpful to understand what makes something an academic source, what makes something a professional source. This is a three-way distinction that I follow. I think it's more useful. Traditional writing courses, as I might have mentioned, only distinguish between academic and non-academic sources, non-academic popular journal sources. That's an inaccurate and simplistic distinction. I think it's too simple. It's more like a continuum where there are gray areas, and there's this middle ground of professional sources, because these are things that you will use in college papers as sources, even though they're not full academic sources. These are good for most college papers, unless you're taking a pretty advanced course. I'm going to stop there for now, and the next videos are going to be some older videos that I made that go into this in more detail, kind of a more step-by-step explanation of different kinds of sources. So some of it might be repeat, and that's fine, because this is important. I've taught this kind of class in many different places, and I took some of this information that I talk about in a real class. In a real class, I would have a better chance to go in more depth and detail and actually show you some examples and pass them around. I can't do it here. But I've taught this in my previous writing classes, so I took the contents and actually made it into some sort of regular YouTube videos. I was intending to start kind of a more academic YouTube channel where I would have like weekly installments talking about academic language topics, and I didn't get very far. I was starting to do it, and then I got really busy and my computer broke down and I had to stop it and I was never able to continue. But I got a few videos out, and it's basically about this stuff. It's the contents that I would discuss in detail in an actual writing class lecture, what I have done in my previous writing classes at where I worked before, which is Korea University. So I took the very same content, I put it into YouTube videos and broke it up into separate videos. So it's basically class lecture content, just in kind of a more pretty YouTube video format in some ways. So I'm going to have you also watch those for the second session of today's class as kind of review and then more in-depth explanation with some more examples. So you have your essay assignment. So I'm not going to give you any Google Form assignments for a while because I want you to work on the essay assignment. So that's your homework. So enjoy your homework and have a good weekend. I'll see you next Wednesday. Goodbye.